Welcome to Slow Night, Ancient Tales. Tonight, the air is heavy with the scent of old ink and the echoes of a distant struggle. We open the pages of the Baekbeomilji, the diary of a man who carried the weight of a nation on his shoulders. From the foggy streets of the French Concession to the quiet halls of Chongqing, let these memories of courage and sacrifice drift into your mind. Settle in, breathe softly, and listen to the whispers of a resilient soul. Excerpts from Baekbeomilji, the Diary of Baekbeom, Volume 2. 1. Foreword. Motive and background for writing. I am now 67 years old. As I take up this brush again at the Provisional Government of the Republic of Korea building located at No. 1 Osayagang, Heping Road, Chongqing, 14 years have passed since I wrote the first volume of Baekbeomilji at the age of 53 at the Provisional Government building at No. 4 Baoqingli, Maling Road in the French Concession of Shanghai. Why did I write Baekbeomilji? Since I threw away my pen in my youth to fight for my country and people, without calculating my strength or talent, without regard for success or failure, glory or disgrace, over 30 years had passed. And after spending over 10 years protecting the Provisional Government, even if only in name, I was approaching 60 without having accomplished a single thing. At that time, to break through the stagnant situation and revive the fading spirit of the March 1st movement among our people, I wrote letters to our compatriots in the Americas and Hawaii. I explained the crisis of the independence movement, secured financial support, and sought out hot-blooded young men to plan a terror campaign of assassination and destruction. Anticipating that if the Tokyo and Shanghai incidents miraculously succeeded, my own foul-smelling hide would also meet its end, I wrote this Baekbeomilji with the intention of passing it on to my two sons in the homeland once they grew up and went overseas. I mimeographed it and sent it to several comrades in the Americas and Hawaii, asking them to show it to my sons in the future. However, I did not find a place to die, and with this humble life still intact, I have come to write the second volume of Baekbeomilji. By now, my two sons have also grown up, so there is no longer a need to write such things for that day. My purpose in writing this now is born of an old man's anxiety, hoping that our comrades overseas will look upon the circumstances of my 50 years of struggle, use my numerous mistakes as a cautionary mirror, and avoid repeating those same errors. The improved situation of the Provisional Government. The situation as I write this second volume is vastly improved compared to when I wrote the first volume in Shanghai. Back then, let alone foreigners, even our own Koreans, aside from the state councilors and a dozen or so members of the Provisional Assembly, never came to visit the Provisional Government. It was truly a provisional government in name only, devoid of substance. But today, as I write the second volume, various Korean factions and parties in mainland China support and defend the Provisional Government, and over 10,000 compatriots in the Americas and Hawaii revere this government, remitting funds for the independence movement. Diplomatically, whereas in the past government officials of China, the Soviet Union, and the United States provided secret assistance but no official relations, today U.S. President Roosevelt has broadcasted, Korea will become a completely independent and sovereign nation in the future. In China, Sun Fo, president of the Legislative Yuan, publicly declared, China's best policy for eradicating Japanese imperialism lies in recognizing the Korean Provisional Government. We ourselves have established a diplomatic commission in Washington, appointing Dr. Syngman Rhee as chairman to focus on diplomacy and propaganda. Militarily, the Korean Liberation Army has been officially organized with Lee Chung-chun, another name for Ji Chung-chun, as commander-in-chief, establishing a headquarters in Xi'an and planning military recruitment, training, and operations. Financially, due to the stagnation of the independence movement, the shrinking of public sentiment, enemy oppression, and economic hardship, the Provisional Government's income had dwindled year by year, making it difficult even to pay rent. However, since the bombings in Hong Kong, Shanghai, the perception of the Provisional Government among Koreans and foreigners has changed, and our income has gradually increased. By the 23rd year of the Republic, 1934, income exceeded 530,000 won, truly the first record of its kind since the establishment of the Provisional Government. Reflections on Death. In this way, the state of the provisional government has improved since I wrote the first volume in Shanghai. But as for myself, I am consumed with welcoming the daily approach of illness and old age. If the Shanghai era was a time of striving to die, the Chongqing era can be called a time of dying. If someone were to ask how I wish to die, my ultimate desire would be to enter our homeland on the day independence is achieved, hold a glorious entry ceremony, and then die. But at the very least, I wish to visit our compatriots in the Americas and Hawaii, and on the flight back, die aboard the airplane. If my body is thrown out and falls on a mountain, it will feed the birds and beasts. If it falls in the water, it will be eternally buried in the bellies of the fish. They say the world is a sea of suffering. It is hard to live, but it is also hard to die. I contemplated suicide several times in Seodaemun prison and at the Incheon port construction site, but I could not go through with it. Even my elder comrade An Myung-gun, Mason, who deliberately fasted for 4 days to die, was forced to swallow raw eggs by the Seodaemun guards and survived. Dying is a luxury only those with freedom can afford. It is by no means an easy task. Looking back on my 70 years of life, I did not live because I tried to live, but I lived because life was sustained, and this body, which could not die even when it wanted to, is finally reaching the point where it will die as it fades away. 2. Shanghai, after the March 1st movement. 2.1 Establishment of the Provisional Government and appointment as Director of Police. In March of the year of Gimi, 1919, arriving in Shanghai from Andong County aboard a ship owned by a British man named George, I led Kim Bo-yeon to find Mr. Lee Dong-yong. It was our first meeting in over 10 years since we discussed the affairs of the Sogando Military Academy in Yanggi-tak's guest room in Seoul. The fine appearance of the man who had been entrusted with full authority to prepare for the liberation project showed signs of aging and wrinkles from over 10 years of hardship. As we shook hands, we were overcome with deep emotion. When I arrived in Shanghai, it had already been 2 months since the prominent figures who had arrived earlier organized the New Korea Youth Party and dispatched Kim Gyu-sik as the national representative to the Paris Peace Conference. It was in early April that figures who had gathered from all over after the March 1st movement organized the Provisional Government and the Provisional Assembly, declaring it to the world at home and abroad. The head of this newly born Provisional Government of the Republic of Korea was Premier Dr. Syngman Rhee, and under him were departments of Interior, Foreign Affairs, Finance, Justice, and Transportation, with various senior leaders of the liberation movement appointed as ministers. Because the ministers were in distant lands and could not take office, youths were appointed as vice ministers to act on their behalf. It was at this time that I petitioned An Chang-ho, the Minister of the Interior, to be a gatekeeper for the government. Though I applied to be a gatekeeper, I was appointed as the director of the police bureau. For the next 5 years, I had to concurrently perform the duties of interrogator, judge, prosecutor, and executioner all by myself. The reason being that at the time, the punishment for criminals was either release with a warning or execution. For example, a 17-year-old boy named Kim Do-soon followed a provisional government special envoy dispatched to the homeland all the way to Shanghai, was bribed by the Japanese consulate to act as a pawn to capture the envoy, and for the crime of receiving 10-won, he was sentenced to the extreme penalty despite being a minor, something unseen in established nations. My duty at the police bureau was not ordinary police administration like in established nations. It was to prevent the activities of Japanese spies and to monitor independence activists who might surrender to the Japanese, in order to observe from which direction the enemy's evil hands were reaching. To do this, I employed over 20 uniformed and plainclothes bodyguards. With this, a secret war against the Japanese consulate in Hongkou began. 2. Secret feuds and spy incidents in the French Concession. At the time, the authorities of the French Concession were well aware of our national situation. When the Japanese consulate requested the arrest of our compatriots, the French would notify us in advance so we could escape, and then they would merely search an empty house accompanied by Japanese police. When the Japanese pirate Tanaka Gichi came to Shanghai, Oh Song-ryun threw a bomb at him at the Hwangpu Wharf. When the bomb failed to explode, Oh fired a pistol, but it missed Tanaka and killed an American woman instead. Following this incident, Japan, Britain, and France collaborated to conduct a massive search of Koreans in the French Concession. My mother had just arrived in Shanghai from our homeland at the time. One early morning, 7 Japanese police officers, led by a French officer named Sedinap, entered my bedroom. Sedinap knew me well. Upon seeing me, he told me to get dressed and follow him, stopping the Japanese police from tying me up. When we went to the French police headquarters, 5 people, including one Sehun, had already been brought in. The French authorities refused to allow the Japanese police to interrogate us and rejected their demand to hand us over to the Japanese consulate. They had me act as a guarantor for the 5 men and then released all of us. Because I always appeared in the French concession courts representing the provisional government as a jury member regarding matters involving our compatriots, as long as it wasn't a crime caught in the act, they would release them upon my guarantee. Once the Japanese police realized my relationship with the French authorities, they never again requested my arrest from the French. Instead, they tried to lure me out of the concession, so I never took a single step outside of it. I cannot write down all the bizarre things that happened during my 5 years as police director, nor do I remember them all, but I will speak of just a few. The Seonwoo Gap case. When we caught the high-level spy Seonwoo Gap, he realized his crime was punishable by death and volunteered to be executed. I spared him after receiving an oath that he would atone for his sins with meritorious service, but he fled back to the homeland within 4 days. The Kang In-woo case. Kang In-woo came to Shanghai as a Japanese police inspector, explained his mission from the government general, and asked me to give him fake intelligence reports. I did so, and upon returning home, he was made the magistrate of Pungsan for his merit. The Jongpilhwa case. Kim Ga-jin, Dongnong, the former Minister of Interior of the old Korean Empire, threw away the title of baron he received from the Japanese after the March 1st declaration, organized the Daedong Party, and was active before coming to Shanghai with his son, Wi-han. The Japanese considered it a disgrace that a baron was involved in the independence movement, so they sent Jongpilhwa, the cousin of Wi-han's wife, to campaign for Dongnong's return. We discovered this, arrested Jong, and after interrogating him and getting a full confession, he was executed. The Hwang Hakseon case. Hwang was a man from Haeju who came to Shanghai before the March 1st movement. Feigning great zeal for our movement, he hosted visiting patriots at his house. Using this as an opportunity, he communicated with the Japanese consulate for money on one hand and maliciously slandered the provisional government to patriotic youths on the other. This led Na Chang-heon, Kim Wi-han, and a dozen others to form a group and attack the provisional government. This was quickly suppressed, and the culprits were all arrested by the police bureau. Because it was clear they were deceived by Hwang Hakseon's plot, they were released with a warning, and Na Chang-heon and Kim Gi-jae, who were seriously injured, were hospitalized. The investigation revealed that Hwang, receiving funds and orders from the Japanese consulate, planned to assassinate the ministers and the police director. He manipulated Na Chang-heon, a medical student, to rent a 3-story brick house, put up a hospital sign, and planned to lure the ministers and me there to kill us. When I showed this interrogation record to Na Chang-heon, he jumped up, confessed to being deceived, and insisted that his father-in-law, Hwang Hakseon, be executed. But by then, Hwang had already been executed. I judged that Na, Kim, and the others had absolutely no malicious intent and were merely victims of Hwang's scheme. The case of the young man named Park. Once, a young man named Park requested a meeting with the police director. As soon as he faced me, he shed tears, placed a pistol and a notebook in front of me, and said that he had arrived from the homeland a few days ago. The Japanese consulate, seeing his strong physique, ordered him to kill Kim Gu, promising much money if successful, and good land for his family to live peacefully, even if he failed and died. If he refused, he would be severely punished as a rebellious Korean. Forced to agree, he brought the weapon into the French concession and even saw me on the street. However, the thought arose in him, how dare I, a Korean myself, harm someone working so hard for independence. So he surrendered the pistol and notebook to me and said he would run away to a distant province and become a merchant. I believed him, thanked him, and let him go. I have lived by the creed, do not employ a person you suspect, and do not suspect a person you employ. Because of this, I have had my share of failures, and the Han Tae-gyu case is an example. Han Tae-gyu was a man from Pyongyang. He was very diligent and gained the trust of both Koreans and foreigners during the 7 or 8 years he worked for me. Even after I resigned as police director, he continued to work for the bureau. One day early in the morning, No Baek-rin came to my house and said there was the corpse of a young woman in traditional Korean dress on the street. When I went out, it was the body of Myungju. After coming to Shanghai, Myungju had worked as a maid in a house rented by Jong In-gwa and Hwang Sok-nam, and there were rumors of her engaging in indecent acts with young men. No remembered seeing Han Tae-gyu walking with this woman one night not long ago, but had passed it off as just a young man's behavior. Upon inspecting the body, it was clear she was murdered. There was blood on her head, suggesting she was struck first, and marks on her neck where she was strangled. This method was exactly what I had learned from Kim Jinsa of the Hwalbindang, Righteous Brotherhood, in Seodaemun prison, and taught to my bodyguards. Getting a lead from this, the investigation proved Han Tae-gyu was the culprit. I asked the French police to arrest him. Sitting as a jury member during his interrogation, I heard his confession. After I resigned, due to various circumstances, he was bribed by the Japanese to become their spy. While secretly communicating with Myungju, she noticed he was a spy. Fearing she would report him to me, he killed her. Though Myungju's conduct may have been improper, her patriotism was fervent. Han received a life sentence. Later, my former colleague Na Woo told me he had suspected Han for a long time because he spent money freely, but without solid proof. He feared I would scold him for suspecting a comrade, so he kept quiet. Later, Han Tae-gyu incited other prisoners, planning a prison break on January 1st. He then betrayed them by informing the prison authorities, having the guards stand by heavily armed. At the agreed time, the cell doors opened simultaneously, and prisoners rushed out with knives, clubs, stones, and ash. Han Tae-gyu fired a gun, instantly killing 8 prisoners. The other prisoners were terrified and stopped, suppressing the riot. I heard that during the trial for this incident, Han testified as a witness while sitting at the head of the coffins containing the 8 bodies he had shot. Later, I received a letter from him stating he had been released for the great merit of killing 8 fellow inmates, and that he had repented of his past wrongs and asked me to employ him again. I later heard that, frightened by my lack of response, he fled to the homeland and was running a small business. I agonized in deep shame over having placed absolute trust in such a heinous villain, feeling unable to lift my head in public. I will end the stories of my time as police director here and recall the turbulent twists and turns of our entire movement since the provisional government was established in Shanghai. 2.3 Ideological Conflict and Disruption by Communist Forces. In the year of Jimmy, 1919, the first year of the Republic of Korea, whether inside or outside the country, spirits were united solely toward the national independence movement. However, influenced by global ideological trends at the time, people among us began talking about feudalism and proletarian revolution, leading to ideological divisions and conflicts within our once simple movement. Even among the staff of the provisional government, struggles between nationalism and communism began covertly and overtly. It went so far that Premier Lee Dong-hui advocated for a communist revolution, while President Syngman Rhee advocated for democracy. Opinions clashed even in state council meetings, resulting in bizarre situations of confrontation and conflict happening continuously. For example, the state council appointed Yeo Un-hyung, An Gong-gon, and Han Yong-gwon as representatives to Russia, but when the travel funds actually arrived, Lee Dong-hui secretly sent only his confidant Han Yong-gwon and only announced it around the time Han left Siberia. Lee Dong-hui was originally a major in the Ganghwa garrison. After the army was disbanded, he crossed over to Vladivostok and went by the name Daejayu, Great Freedom. One day, Lee Dong-hui asked me to take a walk in the park. In a quiet voice, he asked for my help. Feeling somewhat displeased, I asked if there was any negligence in my duty as police director in protecting the premier. Waving his hand, Lee said, "It's not that. Revolution is a business of shedding blood. The independence movement we are conducting now is merely a democratic revolution. So even if we achieve independence this way, we will have to undergo a communist revolution again. Isn't shedding blood twice a great misfortune for our people? So, Jeogyuni, meaning younger brother, a term Lee fondly used for his subordinate comrades, how about you join me in carrying out a communist revolution?" He was asking for my intent. To this I replied, "Can we carry out a communist revolution without taking direction and orders from the Third Communist International?" Lee shook his head and said, "No, we cannot." I responded in a firm tone, "Our independence movement is a movement of our Korean people. Being governed by the direction or orders of a third party means depending on others, which violates the charter of our provisional government. It is highly inappropriate for the premier to speak like this, so I cannot accept your guidance, and I advise you to exercise prudence." Lee turned away with a dissatisfied face. When Han Yong-guan, secretly sent by Premier Lee, crossed the Russian border and stated his mission as a representative of our government to the border officials, it was reported to the Moscow government. By their orders, Korean compatriots in Russia draped themselves in taegukgi, Korean flags, and warmly welcomed him at every railway station. Upon arriving in Moscow, Soviet Supreme Leader Lenin personally met Han Yong-guan. When Lenin asked how much money was needed for the independence movement, Han blurted out, 2 million rubles. Lenin smiled and asked, "Will 2 million rubles be enough to fight Japan?" Regretting that he asked for too little, Han made the excuse that compatriots in the homeland and America were raising funds, so that amount would suffice for the time being. Lenin said, "It is natural for a people to handle their own affairs," and immediately ordered the foreign ministry to disperse 2 million rubles to the Korean Provisional Government. Han Yong-guan left Moscow with the first installment of 400,000 rubles. When Lee Donghui received news that Han had left with the money, he did not inform the State Council. Instead, he secretly sent Kim Lip, his chief secretary and confidant, to Siberia to intercept the money directly into his own hands without turning it over to the provisional government. However, Kim Lip had his own ulterior motives. He used the money to first buy land in North Gando for his family, and upon returning to Shanghai, he lived in hiding, took a Cantonese woman as a concubine, and began a luxurious life of pleasure. When the provisional government sought to hold Lee Donghui accountable, he resigned as premier and fled to Russia. Han Yong-guan went back to Moscow, claimed he needed funds for a unification movement, acquired another 200,000 rubles, and secretly returned to Shanghai. He scattered this money among communist factions to convene what they called the Assembly of National Representatives. However, the communists themselves were not united and were split into 3 factions. The Shanghai faction led by Lee Donghui, the Irkutsk faction headed by An Byung-chan and Yo Un-hyung, and the ML, Marxist-Leninist Party faction organized by students studying in Japan, led by Kim Jun-yeon and guided by the Japanese Marxist Fukumoto Kazuo. The ML party was insignificant in Shanghai, but highly active in Manchuria. We had everything under the sun, even an anarchist faction alongside the communists. Brothers Lee Ol-gyu and Lee Jong-gyu, along with Yu Jam-yong, were fierce anarchist leaders active in Shanghai and Tianjin. The so-called Assembly of National Representatives held in Shanghai, funded by Han Yong-guan's red money, would be more aptly called a hodgepodge assembly. Over 200 representatives gathered from Japan, Korea, China, and Russia under various colorful titles of group representation. Among them, the Irkutsk and Shanghai communist factions fiercely competed to drag or expel nationalist representatives. The Irkutsk faction advocated the creation theory, while the Shanghai faction advocated the modification theory. The creation theory argued for dissolving the current government and creating a new one, while the modification theory argued for keeping the current government but restructuring it. No matter how much these 2 factions fought, they could not unite, and the assembly ultimately collapsed. Consequently, the creation faction created their own Korean government, with Kim Gyu-sik, the original government's foreign minister, as its head. They took this government to Vladivostok to present it to Russia, but Moscow ignored them, and it fizzled out to nothing. During this fight between the two communist factions, even innocent independence activists were bewildered by the deceptive rhetoric of creation and modification. The situation became so chaotic that I, as Minister of the Interior at the time, ordered the dissolution of the assembly. Thus ended the tragicomedy spy, arced by the red money, and the situation stabilized. Around this time, Kim Lip, the embezzler of the Provisional Government's public funds, was shot and killed by two young men, Oh Myung-jik and No Jong-gun, which people found deeply satisfying. The Provisional Government revoked Han Yong-gwan's representative authority to Russia and sent An Gong-gon instead, but it was ineffective. And diplomatic relations between the Provisional Government and Russia were soon severed. Even after the assembly failed, the communists remaining in Shanghai used the pretext of left-right unification to coax nationalist activists into shifting the direction of the national independence movement toward a communist movement. Separate detachments of the Communist Party, the Youth League in China, and the Youth League stationed in China echoed the same sentiments while vying for our youth in Shanghai. They proposed that nationalists unite to carry out a communist revolution. Then another comedy occurred. Lenin issued a new directive. In colonies, prioritize the national independence movement over social movements. Instantly, the communists who had mocked and criticized the national independence movement until yesterday suddenly transformed into national independence activists, shouting that national independence was their immediate goal. Since the communists changed their tune, the nationalists had no reason to reject them, so they formed the Unification Independence Party Promotion Society. However, the communists only changed their words. Their insides remained the same. Under the guise of a national movement, they intended to draw in nationalists and entangle them under their so-called hegemony. But the nationalists, now fully aware of their schemes and tactics, refused to be manipulated. As a result, the communists destroyed the very promotion society they had initiated with their own conspiracies. What emerged from this was the Korean Independence Party, a purely nationalist organization led by Lee Dong-yong, An Chang-ho, Jo Won-gu, Lee Yu-pil, Cha I-suk, Kim Bong-jun, Song Byung-jo, and myself. From this point on, nationalists and communists maintained separate organizations. Once the nationalists united, the communists lost their footing in Shanghai and fled to South and North Manchuria. There, the nationalist unity among compatriots was still weak and scattered, and there was no real understanding of communism's true nature, allowing them to run wild even more fiercely than in Shanghai. For example, descendants of Lee Sang-ryong became so loyal to communism that they even organized a patricide society. However, since they did not kill their own fathers directly but swapped fathers among members to kill them, it seems a tiny bit of humanity still remained. This red horde infiltrated Manchurian independence groups like the Justice Ministry, the New People's Ministry, the Council Ministry, and the South and North military governments. Through skillful manipulation, they dismantled them from the inside, caused infighting, and caused all these institutions to collapse or destroy each other, shedding much blood among compatriots. Indispensable pillars of our movement like Baekbeomilji, Kim Jwa-jin, and Kim Gyu-sik, not the Dr. Kim Gyu-sik, became tragic victims in this chaos. Amidst the growing apathy of the international community towards us and Japanese oppression, the national independence sentiment was waning day by day. Disrupted by communists, the nationalist front tumbled from division to chaos, and from chaos to annihilation. To make matters worse, Zhang Zuolin, effectively the master of Manchuria, fell for Japanese schemes and began indiscriminately arresting independence activists in his territory and handing them over to Japan. Even Chinese civilians would cut off the heads of Koreans and take them to the Japanese consulate to receive a bounty of 10 won at most, or 3 to 4 won. Later, instances even arose where our own compatriots informed on the locations of the Independence Army. Here, the independence activists themselves share the blame, as their lack of unity and division into 3 or 5 factions caused trouble for compatriots regarding funds and other matters. In the end, Japan occupied Manchuria and created the puppet state of Manchukuo, making our movement practically impossible in Manchuria, which had been our greatest base of operations. Initially, the independence groups in Manchuria all supported the provisional government, but gradually the evil custom of warlordism emerged. First, the Justice Ministry and New People's Ministry stopped taking orders from the provisional government. Only the Council Ministry kept its loyalty to the end, but after these three merged to form a new Justice Ministry, they completely severed ties with the provisional government. They then fractured among themselves, carving away at each other's flesh, and finally fell victim to the communists, acting out a tragedy that ended in their own demise. It is truly a sorrowful thing. The situation in Shanghai also resulted in mutual destruction, where both sides fought and both perished, leaving only the Korean Independence Party to barely maintain the shell of the nationalist camp. 2.4 Defending the provisional government in extreme financial hardship. Without people or money coming into the provisional government, President Syngman Rhee stepped down, and Park Yun-sik took his place as president. However, he only changed the presidential system to a state council premiership before leaving. Lee Sang-ryong, elected as the first premier, came to Shanghai from Sogando to take office, but unable to find willing cabinet members, he retreated back to Sogando. Next, Hong Myeon-hui, later Hong Jin, was elected and arrived from Zhenjiang, but he too failed to form a cabinet. Thus, the provisional government fell into a state of anarchy for a long time, becoming a major issue in the Provisional Assembly. One day, Lee Dong-yong, chairman of the Provisional Assembly, came to see me and urged me to become the premier. I declined for two reasons. First, I am merely the son of a local official, Kim Jong-wi, from the western village of Haeju. No matter how much our government was still an embryonic miniature of its early days, for someone as lowly as myself to become the head of state would greatly impact the prestige of the nation and its people. Second, if figures like Lee Sang-ryong and Hong Myeon-hui failed to form a cabinet because they couldn't find people, there would certainly be no one willing to follow a man like me. Mr. Lee argued that the first reason was nonsensical, and regarding the second, he strongly insisted that if I stepped up, others would follow. Yielding to his insistence, I accepted. Through the formal procedures of the Provisional Assembly, I took office as premier. I formed a cabinet with Yoon Gi-sup, Oh Young-son, Kim Gap, Kim Chol, Lee Ju-hong, and others. Deeply realizing that forming a cabinet under the current system would constantly be difficult, I abolished the system of placing responsibility on a single premier and revised it to a collective state councilor system, gaining the Assembly's consent. Thus, I simply became the chairman of the state councilors, and all councilors were equal in rights and responsibilities. Moreover, since the councilors could take turns serving as chairman, it was very convenient and eliminated all previous divisions. In this way, the government stabilized. But due to economic hardship, we were at a loss on how to maintain the government's name. The government's rent was 31, and the errand boy's salary was less than 21. Yet, we lacked the means to pay even this and faced multiple lawsuits from the landlord. Most of the other committee members had families, but I was alone, having sent both my children back to my mother in the homeland. So I slept at the provisional government office and wandered from house to house of compatriots who had paying jobs, begging for meals. As for the occupations of our compatriots, the most common was ticket inspector for the streetcar company, employing about 70 people. I visited their homes, begging for breakfast and dinner. I was a beggar among beggars. Because everyone knew my situation well, I believe no one gave me a meal out of spite. Especially Jo Bong-gil, Lee Chun-tae, Na Woo, Jin Hui-chang, and Kim Wee-han. They were close comrades, so goes without saying, but other compatriots also genuinely sympathized with me. Yeom Hang-seop used the salary he received from the French Municipal Council to feed impoverished activists like Soko, Lee Dong-yong, and myself. Whenever I left their house, his first wife, Mrs. Im, would follow me out the gate, press a couple of silver coins into my hand and say, "Please buy some candy for the baby." The baby referred to my second son, Shin. She gave birth to a daughter with her first pregnancy and tragically passed away, being buried in the Lujiawan public cemetery. Every time I saw her grave, I promised myself that if ever lacked the means, I would at least erect a tombstone for her. However, as a fugitive leaving Shanghai in hiding, it is my deep regret that I couldn't do so. Even today, Mrs. Im's grave in Lujiawan flashes before my eyes. She treated me so preciously, simply because I was an old man her husband respected. I initially volunteered to be a gatekeeper for the Provisional Government, but rose through the ranks as police director, director of the Labor Bureau, Minister of the Interior, and Premier, eventually becoming a state councilor and chairman. This wasn't because I, a mere gatekeeper, had advanced, but because there was no one else left. To compare, it was like a renowned grand mansion falling into ruin and becoming a den of beggars. In the early days when Syngman Rhee worked as president, not only Chinese but also blue-eyed, high-nosed Westerners from Britain, America, and France would visit the government office. Now, the only Westerners we saw were French police officers bringing Japanese cops to arrest people or coming to collect overdue rent. Furthermore, the number of independence activists, which once swelled to over 1,000, had now dwindled to barely a few dozen. Why did the number of activists decrease so much? First, figures like Vice Minister of Military Affairs Kim Hui-son, independent newspaper president Lee Guang-soo, and Assembly Vice Chairman Zhang In-gwa surrendered to the Japanese and returned home. Second, the covert network Yeonteongje, organized in every province, county, and township at home, was discovered, leading to the capture of many comrades by the Japanese. Third, due to the hardship of making a living, people scattered to find jobs to feed themselves. 2.5. Support from the Korean American community and the emergence of patriot Lee Bong-chang. In this state, what was the provisional government to do? First, we needed money, but where would it come from? Contact with the homeland and Manchuria had already been severed, so we had no choice but to explain our dire situation to our compatriots in the Americas and Hawaii and seek their support. Thus began my letter policy. I trusted the fervent patriotism of the compatriots in America and Hawaii. This was because they had been educated by figures like Seo Jae-pil, Syngman Rhee, An Chang-ho, and Park Young-man. Being completely illiterate in English, I didn't even know how to write an envelope address. So I asked Aom Hang-seop, An Gong-gun, and others to write them for me. Waiting for the results of this letter policy was agonizing. At the time, there was no airmail. It took 2 months just to send a letter between Shanghai and America and receive a reply. However, the wait was worthwhile, as sympathetic replies gradually arrived. Kim Gyeong in Chicago sent $200 raised by the local community, telling us to use IT for rent. Given the provisional government situation at the time, this was by no means a small amount. I was deeply grateful for the devotion of our compatriots. I had never even met Kim Gyeong. In Hawaii, An Chang-ho, Kawai Hyun-sun, Kim Sang-ho, Lee Hong-gi, Im Song-woo, Park Jong-soo, Moon In-hwa, Jo Byung-yo, Kim Hyung-gu, Hwang In-hwan, Kim Yun-bae, Park Sin-ae, and Sim Yong-sin began to dedicate themselves to the provisional government. In the Americas, the Korean National Association gradually developed a loyalty to the government, with Kim Ho, Lee Jong-so, Hong Yeon, Han Si-dae, Song Jong-ik, Choi Jin-ha, Song Heon-ju, and Baek-il-gyu stepping up to support us. In Mexico, Kim Gi-chang and Lee Jong-o, and in Cuba, Im Chon-tek and Park Chang-un backed the provisional government. From the Comrade Society faction, Dr. Syngman Rhee, along with Lee Won-sun, Sun Dae-ok-in, and An Hyun-gyung, participated in the movement to sustain the government. Furthermore, An Chang-ho, not Do-sun, and Im Song-woo in Hawaii promised to arrange funds if I undertook a project that would bring honor to our nation. One day, a young comrade came to see me at the Residents Association. At that time, I was also concurrently serving as the head of the Shanghai Korean Residents Association. He introduced himself as Lee Bong-chang. He said he had been working as a laborer in Japan, but came to Shanghai wanting to participate in the independence movement, asking if a laborer like him could contribute while still working. Because he mixed Korean with Japanese and referred to the provisional government using the Japanese-style term Kajeongbu, fake government, I felt a special need to investigate him. I instructed an association clerk to find him an inn and told the young man that since it was late, we should meet again tomorrow. A few days later, While I was in the association office, I heard loud, drunken voices from the kitchen. The young man was saying, "You people claim to be running an independence movement, so why don't you kill the Japanese emperor?" To this, an association clerk replied, "It's hard enough to kill a single civil or military official. How are we supposed to kill the emperor?" The young man retorted, "Last year, I knelt by the roadside and watched the emperor pass by. At that moment, I thought to myself, if only I had a single bomb in my hand right now, I could kill him." That night, I went to the inn to find Li Bongchang. He explained his purpose for coming to Shanghai. "I am 31 years old this year. Even if I live another 31 years, I won't experience any greater pleasure than I have so far. Because I'll be old. If the purpose of life is pleasure, I've pretty much tasted all the pleasures life has to offer over the past 31 years. From now on, I have come to Shanghai with the goal of dedicating my body to the independence project for the sake of eternal pleasure." At his words, tears filled my eyes. Patriot Li respectfully asked me to guide him on the path of devoting himself to the national cause. I gladly agreed, telling him I would prepare a task for him within a year. However, I asked how he planned to support himself in the meantime, as the provisional government had no means to cover his living expenses. He replied that he had learned the trade of an ironworker, spoke Japanese fluently, had lived as a Japanese man in Japan, and even used a Japanese name, Kinoshita Shozo, having been adopted by a Japanese man, which was the name he used on the ship to Shanghai. He said he would earn his keep working in a factory, living as a Japanese man, and await my guidance. Thus, I warned him not to associate with me frequently, but to visit me secretly once a month at night, and then I sent him off to Hongkou, where many Japanese lived. A few days later, he came and reported that he had gotten a job at a Japanese factory with a monthly salary of 81. After that, he often bought alcohol, meat, and gap noodles, brought them to the association office, and drank with the staff. When drunk, he sang Japanese songs so well that he earned the nickname Japanese Police Inspector. One day, he even walked into the government compound wearing a haori and Japanese wooden clogs, only to be chased out by a Chinese servant. Because of this, I was scolded by Li Dongnyong and other state councilors for allowing a person of questionable identity, whether Korean or Japanese, to enter the government premises. I made excuses, saying I did it to investigate him, but the comrades seemed highly displeased. 2.6 Patriot Li Bongchang's heroic deed in Tokyo. Time passed, and the 1 year I had promised Mr. Li was almost up when the money requested from America finally arrived. Now, both the bombs and the funds were ready. I had Wang Ung procure 1 bomb from the Shanghai arsenal, and Kim Hyun obtain another by sending it from Luji in Henan province. Both were hand grenades. One was for the Japanese emperor, and the other was for Mr. Li's suicide. I continued my life disguised as a beggar, carrying the money on my person, so no one knew I had over 1,001 hidden in my clothes. One day in mid-December, I secretly invited Patriot Li Bongchang to the Chongqing Hotel in the French Concession. We spent the night together, discussing various details about his mission to Japan. I even instructed him on what to say during interrogation by Japanese officials if his suicide attempt failed. After sleeping there, the next morning I took out the wad of cash from my tattered clothes, gave it to Patriot Li, and told him to return after making all preparations for Japan. We then parted ways. 2 days later, he returned, and we spent our final night together at the Chongqing Hotel. At that time, Mr. Li said, "The other day, when you handed me that wad of cash, it brought me to tears. I wondered, what kind of man do you think I am to trust me with such a large sum of money? If I decided to run off with it, what could you possibly do, unable to take a single step outside the French Concession? I have never received such trust in my entire life. This is the first, and also the last. I truly thought that your work is done with the magnanimity of a hero." From there, I took him to Angongun's house, where we held a swearing-in ceremony. I gave him the 2 bombs and an additional 301, promising to send more. When we took a commemorative photograph, my face must have shown a sorrowful expression, because Mr. Li looked at me and said, "I'm going on a path to find eternal pleasure, so let us take this picture with joyful faces." He smiled brightly. I followed his lead and smiled for the camera. Getting into the car, he bowed deeply toward me and drove off toward Hongkou. Over 10 days later, he sent a telegram from Tokyo stating, "The goods will be sold on January 8th. I immediately wired him 201. He wrote back saying that he had been spending money like crazy, falling behind on his inn and food bills, but the 201 allowed him to clear his debts with money to spare. Regarding the political situation at the time, there was a need to break through a new phase. Whether to revive our people's spirit of independence or to soothe the bitter anti-Korean sentiment among the Chinese, exacerbated by the Wanpaoshan incident and the Manchurian incident. Following a meeting of the Provisional Government, the Korean Patriotic Legion was organized to carry out assassinations and sabotage. I was entrusted with full authority to manage the funds and personnel, only needing to report the results to the government. As January 8th was approaching, I briefed the state councilors on the progress. On the awaited January 8th, a telegram from Tokyo appeared in the Chinese newspapers. Korean Li Bongchang shoots at Japanese emperor, unfortunately misses. That Li Bongchang attacked the Japanese emperor was excellent, but that he missed was deeply disappointing. However, many comrades consoled me. They said that while it wasn't as good as the Japanese emperor dying on the spot, spiritually, our Korean people had killed him, and it eloquently proved to the world that our nation had not been assimilated by Japan. Thus, they considered the event a success. My comrades also urged me to be careful with my personal safety. Sure enough, early the next morning, a secret notice arrived from the French Municipal Council. They stated that while the French authorities had protected Kim Gu for the past 10 years, they could not refuse Japan's demand to hand me over since my subordinate had thrown a bomb at the Japanese emperor. The organ of the Chinese Nationalist Party, the Guomin Ribao National Daily in Qingdao, printed the headline in special large type, "Korean Li Bongchang shoots at Japanese emperor, unfortunately misses." Because of the use of the word unfortunately, Purang Bushing, the Japanese military and police stationed there attacked and destroyed the newspaper office. Furthermore, because several other newspapers in places like Changsha also used the phrase unfortunately missed, Japan lodged severe protests with the Chinese government, resulting in the closure of all newspapers that used the word unfortunately. Then, using the pretext that a Japanese person was beaten to death by Chinese people in Shanghai, Japan provoked the January 28th incident, Shanghai incident. In reality, Patriot Li Bongchang's attack on the Japanese emperor and the Chinese expressing their feelings that he unfortunately missed were the primary causes of this war. Following the advice of my comrades, I ceased all activities during the day. At night, I slept at comrades' houses or brothels, and I begged for food by wandering among compatriots' homes. The compatriots treated me with the utmost sincerity. With the participation of the 19th Route Army's Kai Ting-kai and the Central Army's 5th Army Commander Zhang Jizhong, the battle against the Japanese in Shanghai grew extremely fierce. A rear hospital was set up even inside the French Concession. Seeing trucks constantly passing by, dripping blood, fully loaded with the corpses of Chinese soldiers and the wounded, I shed tears wondering when we, too, would fight the Japanese and dye our homeland's rivers and mountains with blood. Fearing that passers-by would look at me suspiciously, I lowered my head and hurried away. When news of the Tokyo incident spread, many letters arrived from compatriots in the Americas and Hawaii. Some suggested that we take part in the current Sino-Japanese war to help China fight Japan, while others promised to provide necessary funds if we undertook appropriate operations. However, joining the Sino-Japanese war now was like digging a well only when thirsty. What could we do without preparation? I was planning to use Koreans who went in and out of the Japanese military as laborers to plant incendiary bombs in airplane hangars and munitions depots to burn them down. But when the Shanghai War ended with China yielding to Japan through the Songhu Armistice, my plans came to nothing. The Chinese plenipotentiary for the Songhu Armistice was Q Taichi. 2.7 Patriot Yun Bongil's heroic deed at Hongkou Park. Therefore, I sought out individuals to continue carrying out assassination and sabotage plans. Na Sok-ju, a disciple and comrade I trusted, had already infiltrated the Oriental Development Company in Seoul years ago, shot 7 Japanese, and committed suicide. Lee Song-chun had been caught and executed in Tianjin, so thinking of them now was of no use. I had already ordered newly recruited comrades Lee Daok-ju and Yu Jin-sik to assassinate the Japanese Governor-General and sent them to the homeland, and I was about to send Yu Sang-gun and Choi Hong-sik to Manchuria to assassinate Honjo Shigeru, the commander of the Japanese Kwantung Army, when Yoon Bong-gil came to find me. Yoon had been working at a factory run by compatriot Park Jin, making hats and daily necessities out of horsehair, and had recently been peddling vegetables in the Hongkou area. Yoon Bong-gil explained that his original purpose in coming to Shanghai was to do something great, and he had been wandering around Hongkou carrying a vegetable basket, waiting for an opportunity. However, now that the Sino-Japanese War was over, he lamented that it was hard to find a place to die. He asked me to use him if I had any plans similar to the Tokyo incident. Seeing his great resolve to lay down his life for the country, I gladly answered, "I was just looking for someone exactly like you, so put your mind at ease." I then told him that the Japanese, quite triumphant over winning the recent Shanghai battle, were going to hold a grand celebration for the emperor's birthday, Tenchosetsu, at Hongkou Park on April 29th. I proposed we achieve a great objective on this occasion and explained the plan. Hearing my words, Yoon quickly agreed. "I will do it. My mind is finally at peace. Please prepare it." Later, a notice appeared in the Japanese newspaper Shanghai Nichinichi Shimbun, stating that those attending the emperor's birthday celebration must bring a boxed lunch, bento, a water bottle, and a Japanese flag. Seeing this, I immediately visited Wang Ung, real name Kim Hong-il, on Ximen Road and asked him to negotiate with Song Shikma, the director of the Shanghai Arsenal, to build bombs disguised as the water bottles and bento boxes carried by the Japanese, and to deliver them within 3 days. Wang Ung returned and said the director wanted me to visit the arsenal personally. When I went, under the guidance of engineer Wang Baek-soo, they demonstrated the performance of 2 types of bombs made to look like water bottles and bento boxes. The testing method involved digging a trench in the yard, lining the 4 sides with iron plates, placing the bomb inside, and attaching a long string to the detonator. A person would lie face down dozens of paces away and pull the string. With a thunderous roar from the trench, shattered pieces of iron flew into the air, a truly spectacular sight. Only after testing about 20 detonators in this manner, without a single failure, did they install them into the actual objects. Engineer Wang explained that the reason they were taking such care at the arsenal was out of regret that the bombs used in the Tokyo incident had been insufficiently powerful. Thus, they made over 20 such bombs for us free of charge. The next day, the water bottle bombs and bento bombs were delivered by the arsenal's car to Wang Ung's house on Ximen Road. This was out of their kindness, knowing it would be difficult for us to transport such contraband. I discarded the Chinese beggar clothes I was wearing, went to a rag shop, bought a suit, and dressed up as a dignified gentleman. I transported the bombs one by one to the homes of close compatriots living in the French Concession. Without telling the hosts what they were, I simply said it was precious medicine and asked them to keep them away from fire, hiding them here and there like a crow hiding its food. Having lived in Shanghai for a long time, I was close to the compatriots and was treated like family wherever I went. Especially since the Tokyo incident, ladies were so comfortable with me that they would say, "Teacher, please watch the baby for a bit," and hand me their crying infants while they went about their work. Word got around that babies who were crying would stop and play well when handed to me. April 29th was rapidly approaching. I bought Yoon Bong-gil a neat Japanese-style suit and had him go to Hongkou Park every day to observe the preparation of the ceremony grounds, allowing him to choose a suitable position for himself on the day of the event. I also had him prepare a photograph of General Shirakawa Yoshinori and a Japanese flag. One day Yoon returned from Hongkou and said, "That bastard Shirakawa must have come to the venue today. He stood right next to me. If only I had a bomb then, I would have finished him off." He expressed his regret. I looked at him sternly and rebuked him. What kind of talk is that? The rule of a hunter is that you don't shoot a sitting bird or a sleeping beast. You make them fly or run, and then you shoot. Hearing you say such things makes me think you lack confidence for tomorrow. Looking somewhat embarrassed by my words, Yoon defended himself. No, that's not it. Seeing him right next to me just gave me that sudden urge. Why wouldn't I have confidence for tomorrow? I do. I smiled and said, I too am confident in your success. When I first told you this plan, didn't you say your mind was at peace? I believe that is the proof of success. Your mind must not waver. If your heart flutters, your mind is wavering. I then told him how my own heart fluttered when I was about to kill Tsuchida Joryang at Chihapo, and how my mind became calm when I remembered the phrase taught to me by Go Nongson. To catch a branch and hold on requires no skill. Letting go of the branch while suspended over a cliff is what makes a true man. Yoon seemed to engrave this in his heart. I sent Yoon to his inn and took the 2 bombs to Kim Hae-san's house. I asked Kim and his wife to buy meat and prepare an early breakfast for tomorrow, saying Yoon Bong-gil was leaving for Manchuria on a crucial mission. The next day was April 29th. I shared my final meal with Yoon Bong-gil at Kim Hae-san's house. As we ate, I quietly observed Yoon's demeanor. His profound calmness was like a farmer eating a hearty meal before heading out to work in the fields. Seeing Yoon's composed and brave attitude, Kim Hae-san quietly advised me, there is so much to be done here in Shanghai for the dignity of our people. Is there really a need to send a man like Yoon somewhere else? Tasks are best left to those who step up to do them. Let's wait and see what kind of noise he makes and from where. I answered Kim Hae-san this way. The meal ended and the clock struck 7. Yoon took out his watch and handed it to me, saying, This watch is the one I bought for 6-1 after the swearing-in ceremony yesterday, as you instructed. Your watch is only worth 2-1, so let's exchange them. My watch will only be of use for another hour anyway. I accepted Yoon's watch as a keepsake and gave mine to him. As he got into the car to leave for the ceremony, Yoon took out the money he had left and handed it to me. Why don't you keep a little money on you? I asked. Yoon replied, Even after paying for the car, I'll have 5 or 6-1 left. Just then, the car began to move. With a choked voice, I said, Let us meet later in the underground afterlife. Yoon leaned his head out the car window and bowed to me. With a loud roar, the car carried the hero of the world, Yoon Bong-gil, speeding toward Hongkou Park. 2.8 The Aftermath and Going into Hiding. Straight away, I stopped by Jo Sang-seop's shop, wrote a quick note, and gave it to the clerk, Kim Yong-rin, instructing him to deliver it urgently to An Chang-ho. The note read, Do not remain at home from 10 a.m. onwards. A major incident is likely to occur. Then I went to Soko, Lee Dong-yong, reported the progress of everything up to that point, ate lunch, and waited for news. It wasn't until around 1 p.m. that murmurs began among the Chinese that someone had thrown a bomb at Hongkou Park and killed many Japanese. Some said a Chinese person threw it. Others said it was the work of a Korean. Among our compatriots, only a few besides myself, such as Lee Dong-yong, Lee Si-young, and Jo Wan-gu, could have guessed that Yoon Bong-gil, who was carrying a vegetable basket until yesterday, had committed this earth-shattering deed today. Because I had handled this matter entirely alone, it was only on this day that I gave a detailed report to Mr. Lee Dong-yong and waited for further news. At 3 p.m., a newspaper extra finally reported, a massive bomb explodes at the Japanese Emperor's birthday celebration stage in Hongkou Park. Residents Association head Kawabata killed instantly, General Shirakawa, Ambassador Shigemitsu, Lieutenant General Nomura, and many other high-ranking civil and military officials severely wounded. On that day, the Japanese newspapers claimed the bombing was the work of the Chinese. It was only in the next day's papers that they uniformly printed Yoon Bong-gil's name in large letters, and a massive search began in the French Concession. I secretly summoned An Gong-gun and Aom Hang-seop, ordering them to work alongside me from then on. I negotiated with the American Mr. Fitch, whose name translates to B.O. Seng in Chinese, to hide us temporarily. Mr. Fitch gladly agreed and offered his entire second floor to me. Thus, the 4 of us, myself, Kim Chol, An Gong-gun, and Aom Hang-seop, stayed at his house. Mr. Fitch was the son of the late Reverend Fitch, and Reverend Fitch had been a hidden benefactor of our independence movement in Shanghai. Mrs. Fitch personally took care of our meals. Using the telephone at the Fitch residence, we found out who had been arrested and managed tasks like providing relief to the families of captured comrades and securing travel funds for those needing to flee. Even though I had sent a messenger with a letter, unfortunately, An Chang-ho was arrested while visiting Li Yupil's house, and Jang Hyung-gon, Kim Deok-gon, and a few young students were also caught. However, we felt fortunate to learn that most of the independence activists were safe. But with the search intensifying every day, the resident compatriots could not live in peace, and there was a risk of innocent Koreans being arrested. Therefore, I wanted to immediately issue a statement declaring that I, Kim Gu, was responsible for both the Tokyo incident and this Hongkou bombing. An Gong-gun opposed this, so I delayed, but eventually I had Aom Hong-sop draft the statement, asked Mrs. Fitch to translate it, and released it to the news agencies. Thus, it became known to the whole world that the mastermind behind Li Bong-chang throwing a bomb at the Japanese emperor and Yoon Bong-gil killing and wounding General Shirakawa and others in Shanghai was Kim Gu. When this happened, prominent Chinese figures like En Jufu and Zhu Jinglan requested special meetings with me, and thanks to the activities of Park Chan-ik Nampa in Nanjing, material assistance also poured in. The Chinese sentiment toward Koreans, which had severely deteriorated due to the Manchurian and Wampoushan incidents, dramatically improved due to patriot Yoon Bong-gil's sacrifice. The Japanese first placed a 200,000 won bounty on my head. Then, in a joint effort by the Japanese Ministry of Foreign Affairs, the Government General of Korea, and the Shanghai Garrison Command, they raised the bounty to 600,000 won to catch me. However, unlike before when I never took a step out of the French Concession, I now traveled freely by car through both the British and French concessions. One day, I went to eat wedding noodles at the house of a streetcar inspector nicknamed Captain Park. A squad of over 10 Japanese police discovered this and searched the house right down to the furnace. Fortunately, I had already eaten my noodles standing in the kitchen and left, barely escaping. The Nanjing government even offered to send an airplane if my life was in danger. However, I realized that taking me there would come with demands I had no means to satisfy. Thinking there was no need to burden another country in vain, I declined their offers. While this was going on, over 20 days passed. One day, Mrs. Fitch told me that spies had found out I was staying at her house and were covertly surrounding and watching it. Realizing I could no longer stay there, Mrs. Fitch and I got into their car, pretending to be a married couple, while Mr. Fitch acted as the driver. Driving out the gate, we saw Chinese, Russian, and French spies lined up. Mr. Fitch sped the car through them, past the French Concession, and arrived at a train station on Chinese soil, where I took a train and escaped to the Surun Silk Mill in Jiaxing. This was a place Park Nampa had arranged with the help of Chu Fu-cheng and En Jufu. Mr. Lee Dong-yong, along with the families of Eom Hong-sop and Kim Wee-han, had already moved there a few days prior. I heard later that our hiding place at the Fitch residence was discovered because we had overused their telephone, providing a clue. The brush is laid down, and the memories return to the shadows of time. We have walked through the sea of suffering together tonight, finding peace in the stories of those who never gave up. May their unwavering spirit watch over your rest. Thank you for joining me. Sleep deeply and dream of a world made whole. Good night.